welcome to First Presbyterian Church. No matter who you are, where you're coming from, or how you're showing up for worship this morning, no matter what your body looks like, who you love, or what your history with religion and faith might have been, the truest thing about you is that you are deeply loved by God. With that, I invite you to stand as we sing of the joy that God brings to our lives. There's beauty in my brokenness. I've got true love instead of pain. There's freedom though you've captured me. Yeah. I've got joy instead of mourning. We'll sing that again. There's beauty. There's beauty in my brokenness. I've got true love instead of pain. There's freedom though you've captured me. I've got joy instead of mourning. You give me joy down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul. Yes, you give me joy down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul. There's beauty, yeah, there's beauty in my brokenness. I've got true love instead of pain. There's freedom though you've captured me. Yeah. I've got joy instead of mourning. You give me joy down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul. Yes, you give me joy down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul, yeah. Never been so free, caught in your love for me now. I've never been more secure than knowing your heart, Lord. Never been so free, caught in your love for me now. Never been more secure than knowing your heart. You give me joy down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul. Yeah, you give me joy down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul. Never been so free, caught in your love for me now. Never been more secure than knowing your heart, Lord. Never been so free, caught in your love for me now. Never been more secure than knowing your heart, Lord. Oh, yeah. I'm going to invite us to sing that chorus one more time, but before we do, I invite you to just reflect back on maybe the last week, last couple days, where you've seen joy in your life, in your heart, in the world. Bring to mind a specific moment where you felt joy, and we're going to sing that chorus. Here we go. Yes, you give me joy down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul. Yes, you give me joy down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul, down deep in my soul. Last time we sang this next song, it was like 32 degrees and freezing, and the song is called Springtime. It should have been warm that day, but it wasn't. Luckily today is a little bit better than 32 and freezing as we witness signs of new life coming up all around us. You're the resurrection we've waited for. You buried the night and came with the morning. You're the God of heaven, louder the chorus. We will sing. We will sing a new song, 'cause death is dead and gone with the winner. We will sing a new song. Let hallelujahs flow like a river, coming back to life. We're reaching toward the light. Your love is like springtime. The living water. You're the living water. God, we thirst for you. The dry and the barren will flower and bloom. You're the sun that's shining. You restore my soul. Oh, the deeper you call us, oh, the deeper we'll go. We will sing a new song, 'cause death is dead and gone with the winner. We will sing a new song. Let hallelujahs flow like a river. We're coming back to life. We're reaching toward the light. Your love is like springtime. Come tend the soil. Come tend the soil. Come tend the soil of my soul. And like a garden, and like a garden I will grow. And I will grow. Sing that again. Come tend the soil. Come tend the soil. Come tend the soil of my soul. And like a garden, and like a garden I will grow. And I will grow. And I will grow. I will grow. We will sing a new song, 'cause death is dead and gone with the winner. We will sing a new song. Let hallelujahs grow like a river. We're coming back to life. We're reaching toward the light. Your love is like springtime. Like springtime. Like springtime. In a second, we're going to see this video that kind of speaks to the same themes that we were just seeing in this song. New life. The yellow forsythias are coming up. The flowers are starting to pop through, and life is coming back. If you would have a seat and check out this video.
The younger brother who saw his father as dead, who took his inheritance and spent his fortunes, found himself lost in the squalor of his life, and feeding the pigs and desiring food not fit for him to eat. A famine had crossed over his soul, casting a cloud of poverty and disease. This younger son saw himself as a sinner, an outcast to be despised and shamed and hated. In his self-exile, he came to his senses and returned home, returned to himself. And the father who was waiting all this time, seeing him from far off, embraced his child, lavished on him a party, saw his tattered clothing, the worn soles of his shoes, a adorned him richly with all that he had, in abundance, in plenty. The elder perceived someone not estranged, not other and alien, but as a child to be loved, tenderly, compassionately, extravagantly, found to be finally one, becoming whole as he finally came home.
If you would, greet your neighbor with offers of peace. Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to see you here. Thank you for spending I need to talk into the mic. Thank you for spending part of your weekend here with us. I'm Caroline. I'm a pastor here. I am so glad to get to spend part of this very chilly spring morning with you. Thankfully, not 32. There are some welcome cards in the front pews. If you care to feel free to fill out any information that you'd like to share. You can drop them in the offering baskets following the service. And just a few things to bring to your attention today as we are in the midst of this season of Lent. And sorry, this tea is like all honey. I'm just trying to, and maybe like me, you're struggling with allergies. The first is that today we had at 10 o'clock, we had one of our first two congregational conversations focusing on the pastoral nominating committee. So if you've been here for any length of time, you may remember that we are looking for our next head of staff, our next head pastor. If you missed it today but do want to come next week, that will also be at 10 o'clock, and there will be a Zoom option and an in-person option happening at the same time. If you want any more information, just let me know. Also, next week, we have a music retreat on Saturday between 10:30 and 1:30. We have a guest preacher coming next week named Adele Crawford. She was a seminary friend of mine. She is the coolest person. She's a very gifted pastor, very gifted preacher. Before she was in that role, she was a very well-known musician, singing classical music, and her passion is to help people who never thought that they could sing, use music in the language of worship. And so she's going to be leading a retreat for anybody who wants to come on Saturday, and then we'll be preaching in the pulpit on Sunday. Next week, we also have a suicide prevention talk and workshop led by our youth, sponsored by our youth ministry. That will be a time for people, particularly teens, parents, grandparents, but really anybody who has this issue on their heart, as so many of us do, to gather at 4 o'clock to learn more about how to prevent suicide in our communities. If you want any more information, Eric is right here and would be happy to share. And finally, our Guatemala team we have a partnership with our sister church in Guatemala we've had for many, many years. And in typical times, not COVID times, they travel up here 1 year, we travel down there 1 year, and we alternate back and forth. Now, that has been tough to do for a while, but we are following their lead and recording a bunch of videos to share with them, wishing them a happy Easter. There is more information about how to do that on that ministry update page and in the Wednesday e-news. But if you would like to just record a little video of yourself saying Happy Easter or greetings on your phone, you can just mail it in, and that's all you need to do. If you're a Spanish speaker and want to record it in Spanish, great. Otherwise, just record it in English, and we've got some translators on hand. And then very finally, actually, no, second from finally, I'm going to invite Mary Hambleton up. We have a new members or connections class following this service in the chapel, so right across the hall. It's for anybody that just has enjoyed visiting First Pres, wants to find out a little bit more information, or if you want to join and make this formally your church family. So no need to register, but we will be meeting, and we'd love to have anybody that wants to come. Mary.
Thank you. Well, good morning. My name is Mary Hambleton, and I'm an elder on the Congregational Life Committee. I'm here this morning, though, representing both Congregational Life and the Mission Committees with an invitation. So if you're like me, you've been lounging at home the last 2 years in soft pants and fuzzy socks, so you may have forgotten what an invitation is. So let me fill you in on the fun. We'd like to invite all of you to join us, both committees, for Operation Easter Basket. We are inviting you to join us in collecting and assembling about 100 Easter baskets containing groceries and Easter goodies for children and families. The grocery baskets will be distributed to the Migrant Ministry in Kennett Square, and the baskets for kids will go to Salvation Army, Domestic Violence, and Westchester Food Cupboard. We will meet to eat dinner, then assemble the baskets on the night of Wednesday, April 6th, and we'd love it if you could join us. Sounds fun, right? Sounds fun? Yes? Okay, good. Well, I know right about now you're thinking, wait, I do remember invitations. This sounds fun. I want in. Okay, so if you want in, the next part of an invitation is called an RSVP. So that's where you let the host know that you want to participate in their event. You think it sounds like fun and you want to join. So there's 2 ways that you can RSVP for this. The first is to visit the church website. Under the sign-up tab, you'll see a choice that's called Operation Easter Basket. There you're going to see a list of the items that we're collecting, both grocery items for the food basket and goodies for the kids. Fair warning, we've had a lot of success collecting kids stuff, but we are still in need of grocery items. So if you could check that out and then drop your items off before April 6th to the church, that would be great. And then while you're on the website, the same sign-up tab, you'll see OEB Assembly and Dinner. And from there, you can sign up to join us for the pizza dinner on April 6th and then help assemble the baskets. So this is an event for all ages. Nobody's too big, too small, too old, too young. Everybody can come, and there'll be something for everybody to do. So to make this like an official invitation, who is invited? You are. What are you invited to? Operation Easter Basket. When is it? You'll shop now, and then you'll join us on Wednesday, April 6th for dinner from 5:15 to 6, and then we'll start assembling the baskets shortly thereafter. Where are we having this? Here, in the chapel and fellowship hall. And why? Because it's going to be fun. Dress code, come as you are. I'll probably be the one still in my soft pants. In all seriousness, this is a really fun way to join together, help some of our neighbors during a really special season that means a lot to all of us, and to see each other. I haven't seen so many of your smiling faces in the last 2 years, and I'm hoping I'll get my chance at Operation Easter Basket. So start shopping, put on your favorite soft pants, and join me for Operation Easter Basket. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary. Now, if there's any kids that want to head out and join Miss Sarah for for the children's time, please feel free. Okay, so our scripture reading today is one that is familiar to many. It's the parable of the prodigal son, and it's found only in the Gospel of Luke. So listen and hear this parable again. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them, the younger son and the older son. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me. All that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" May God bless this reading. So as a daughter of this church and the descendant of generations of preachers, I am a little embarrassed to admit that my first real memory of the prodigal son is not from Sunday school, though I am sure that I heard it there first, but rather from the Shirley Temple movie, Heidi. My mom's mom was the fun grandma. She was the one who would keep all of the cousins up late, feasting on chocolate marshmallow ice cream and watching her favorite movies on these very well-worn VHS tapes, and Heidi was chief among them. Now, if you have not yet had the privilege of watching Heidi, and I confess, I was like, oh, I could show a little clip from it, and I watched a little bit, and I was like, oh no, oh, it's so bad. I could barely make it through 2 minutes, and I was like, I can't inflict this on other people. But if you remember, Heidi is this sort of she's constantly cheerful, and her grandfather, she's an orphan, and she's sent to live in the Alps with her very gruff, unpleasant grandfather, and she's still remains cheerful, and she goes to, and she asks him at one point, grandfather, will you read from the Bible to me? And they take out this Bible, and it falls open to the passage of the prodigal son, and the orchestra swells, and this grandfather, he's looking at the words, and he looks up with this very dramatic look, and he starts reciting the passage of the prodigal son from memory. And it's clear that this story is, in some really significant way, his story. And that we are supposed to hear in it not something that happened thousands of years ago, but something that is happening now. That his timeless words give voice to his own pain and estrangement. And maybe this image has stuck with me so closely because it was one of the first times that I realized that the Bible is not only a collection of stories of things that happened a long time ago, but it's also a set of lenses that we can view what is happening now in and around us. It's also the reason why I always and forever will hear this passage in a German accent. Now, parables, maybe more than any other part of the Bible, they tend to be sticky. They stick with us. We might not be able to say exactly what happened with King David or be able to recite all 10 commandments from memory. But even the person who only casually shows up to church can probably give a pretty good rundown of the Good Samaritan or say what happens to that 100th sheep that wanders off. Even before, as a kid, I could articulate the concept of betrayal. Heidi's grandfather managed to convey some of the homelessness that is part of all of our birthright as members of the human race. Parables are sticky because the simple outlines are somehow multifaceted and timeless enough to give shape and description to our own lives, and perhaps none more so than the prodigal son or sons, depending on how you look at it. Estrangements, division, family dysfunction, those are the things that keep us up at night. They're the parts of the Bible that we wish weren't so very relatable. Now, parables are delightfully or frustratingly unlike fables. There's not a single takeaway lesson that we can extract and then sort of cast off the container like a tube of toothpaste that's been emptied of its contents. A parable is like a garden, one of those walled gardens that, depending on the season and the time of day and what your mood is when you enter, is always shifting. It's always changing. And every time we visit it, we notice something different about it. We take something different from it. And one critical point, especially with this parable, is that it is many things, but one thing it is not is a parenting advice column. Now, if you are sitting here wondering whether this story is a mandate to welcome home a person who has been abusive or dangerous or harmful, please know that that is not the invitation that Jesus is holding us here. A parable is never a substitute for a therapist's office. Jesus is inviting us to something. He's inviting us to something amazing, but it is not to harm. Rather, I believe that Jesus is inviting us home. Not home as in a house or a family or even a church family, but to something that is less concrete and much deeper. Something that our human definitions of home and family are only the barest shadows of. Among the many, many things that this parable reflects, it is also about three men who each in their own way is led home. Now, the younger son is the logical place for us to start because he is such an obvious mess. Now, right away, any of us can rattle off the many, many things that make him really unpleasant as a figure, but Jesus' first listeners back in the ancient Near East, they would have had an even longer list. And here are some of the things that they might have picked up on. First, the son asks for the sum of his property, not his inheritance. And that is a very critical difference. The sum of a person's property represents the items that would be given upon a parent's death, but it doesn't represent the larger set of responsibilities that would be attached to that. Now, to receive an inheritance means that the inheritor doesn't just get stuff, they also get responsibilities. They take possession of the assets, but they're obligated to use them for the good of the entire clan. So that means you have to maintain the land, you have to maintain the properties, you have to care for and defend your home. Even at the cost of your own life, you have to take care of your servants, your livestock. So it's a big job. So when this son asks for the sum of his property, he's saying, I want the stuff, but I don't want to have any of the responsibility that goes along with having it. They also, these ancient listeners would have had this really visceral sense as well as the emotional cost of this ask. Now think about it, in people in this time, in this place, they didn't have bank accounts, they didn't have investments, they didn't have stocks. The assets that they had were physical. They had houses, they had fields, they had animals, they had wealth that had been built up over generations, literally by hand. So for the son to take his property and leave meant that he was not just liquidating, numbers on a ledger. He wasn't making a withdrawal on his ATM card. he was selling the houses of people he had grown up with. He was casting away their fields, these animals that they had raised by hand since birth. And he was just handing them off to opportunistic strangers who were willing to come in and at a bargain basement price. It also would have been really mystifying to Jesus' hearers why a person would choose to do this. So one didn't need to have a perfect family for a person's clan, their kinsmen, to be literally everything in the ancient world. And by everything, their livelihood, their health care, their old age insurance, how they got married, how they raised their kids, their education. As Americans, like, we look at this story and we tend to be from a, like, we set off and chart our own course kind of culture. And so I imagine, like, when I read this story, there's a part of me that's like, yes, I'm not going to follow the family business. I'm going to go off and do my own thing. I'm actually the only person that did that in my family. But I'm going to, and so we read this and we sort of can relate to that. But for Jesus's original hearers, it would have been so mystifying because it would have been like us liquidating, screwing over every person that you've ever loved, and then taking the profits from that and like taking a rowboat into the Pacific with no food, no map, no nothing. It's like, why would you do that? It's so self-destructive. But maybe it's not totally incomprehensible, because in some ways we do this all the time. I think about our planet and the way we treat it, how we make these decisions in large and small ways that lay waste to the only physical home that we've been given. We sell our birthrights for convenient plastics and cheap electricity. I think clearly, for many of us, war is top of mind right now, and we see the ways that a single person from their own misguided aspirations can just devastate economies and families and dreams. We see drugs, the way that they poison everyone and everything that they touch. We might look at this and dislike the younger brother, but we know him. We know him really well. Now, throughout the ages, people have been divided on the motivations for his return home. Some see him as a penitent, a true penitent, the one who recognizes how he's strayed and he wants to make amends. And others, and I will count myself in this group, see this dude as a master manipulator. He's not reformed, he's hungry. And that made-for-movies speech that he gives, we have heard that before. Where have we heard it? We heard it when Pharaoh talks to Moses after the plagues and says, oh, I'm repentant now. My God. Oh, I'm not worthy. Oh, how, And so Jesus' hearers would have been like, wait a minute, that's familiar. And we know how long Pharaoh's penitence lasted. It was like, as long as it took the Israelites to back. So when we hear his apology, many of us hear a guy who is just going back to the well and to see what else he can get off of his old man. He hasn't learned anything except what it feels like to hit rock bottom. But let's not forget the older brother who's sort of been hovering in the background. One thing, I don't know whether it's fun to point out, but interesting, the word older or elder in Greek, any guesses? David and elder, Presbyterian. So it's a little unsettling. So if you read the story in Greek, it's the Presbyterian brother. It's a little uncomfortably close to home, because if you think about, like, Presbyterians are sometimes called the frozen chosen, and you're like, oh man. So the Presbyterian older brother, along the thing, he does some things that are pretty obvious to us as modern readers that are uncharitable. But ancient Middle Easterners, and actually contemporary readers, would note that the elder brother had two pretty obvious gaffes here. Now, the first is that he bowed out of his role as reconciler of the family. Now, in Jesus' time, when there was a conflict between two people, they did not meet together. They didn't get together they didn't like say, we're going to all get together in the same time, in the same place, and hash this out. Instead, they'd choose one person in the family who would act as a sort of diplomat, a shuttle diplomat going back and forth. This person said this person said that, until they came to a place where both people could publicly reconcile and say, all right, we're good now. And this wasn't like a good thing. It wasn't like, oh, that's so nice of that person to do it. If you depend on your family and that unit for everything, then this is a matter of life and death. So to not take that role, which would naturally be the elder brother's role, means that he is, in refusing that obligation, he's showing his own disregard for the people that he's sort of claiming that he loves so very much. Second, the son refuses to come inside during the celebration. And that is so it would have been very customary at the time for an elder son to serve as sort of the chief servant at a big party like that. And it's the way of showing the family's hospitality. Like, I am so generous that my heir, my eldest son is your servant, valued guests. And the son's refusal is like, imagine being at a wedding and somebody like cuts a big slice of wedding cake like before the bride makes it down the aisle and is like, slamming their face in it or something, or they're pouring out the champagne on the ground. Like, it would be so disgusting. It would be so untoward, and it would make everybody involved sort of look like a fool. So so between like this older brother's boorishness and the younger brother's like sort of, I don't know, fake-ish penitence, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, who is worse in this family? And while we're there, I might say that at least in my mind, the dad shares a little bit of the blame for this. We typically cast him as like the God figure in the story. We say, okay, this is God, so he's outside. We're not going to talk about him so much. But if we suspend that for just one moment and treat him as yet another character in this parable, we might admit that he's not exactly Father of the Year. He enables and neglects in equal measure, and while he does love exuberantly, one wonders about his willingness or ability to shape his children into functional adults. When we look at it that way, the Father's character seems to showcase not the best parts of the divine, but some of our deepest doubts and most distressing questions. We might ask, does God even notice when we're suffering? Are we held accountable when we do wrong? And if not, if no one's held accountable, why bother? What are the limits and the intentions of free will? Now, if any of this has ever nagged at you, you might welcome the news that this parable has been making people uncomfortable since the time that Jesus uttered it. And it's really only in recent times that churches have even worked it into our regular preaching and Sunday school rotation. People never quite knew what to do with it, and we still, in many ways, are still figuring out, what do we do with this? And first, if we assume that the Father is God and that he is entirely ready to forgive anything at any time, no matter how honest our confessions are, why exactly do we need Jesus? In this view, the incarnation and the cross seem actually kind of unnecessary. Now, this passage is used by Muslim scholars for many, many centuries to say, hey, Jesus, great guy, wonderful prophet. We should be following him, but by his own admission, he needn't be the Son of God, because apparently God doesn't need an intermediary to forgive. Now, Jewish scholars have also looked at this passage and said, yeah, it's great, but there's nothing new here. The Old Testament also shows that again and again, the God of Israel has always loved and welcomed back those who lose their way. David, Israel, pretty much everybody who's ever been on the receiving end of a prophet. This is a continuation. There's nothing that shifted. Even the earliest Christian leaders wrestled with this text because, frankly, it seems like a get-out-of-jail-free card. And that was especially tough because they had quite a few people who were like worshiping the emperor on Tuesdays and then showing up for church on Sundays. And you can sort of point to this and be like, well, I feel bad about that, but here I am. And all of that is to say that not to diminish this as a deeply sacred text, nor because we can resolve all of these questions here on a Sunday morning, but to show that this seemingly simple and familiar parable is fraught with so much complexity. There are so many questions and loose ends that if you are a person who has ever harbored doubts about this story and what it's supposed to mean in our lives as Christians, then you can be welcome to a very large club. So, what are we going to do with this? What is the good news? Now, one piece of news that I find really, really helpful is the reminder, and probably it's more of a hit over the head than a reminder, that we need each other to be whole. And in this deeply fractured and warring society, that is as timely a message as any. Now, if we look, neither brother has the full picture of the gospel. One brother is entirely grace, and one brother is entirely works. As wiser preachers than me have pointed out, if the younger brother's repentance is going to stick, if he's going to make it on the straight and narrow, then he needs to learn a lesson from his Presbyterian brothers, decency and order. If the older brother is going to live without bitterness and resentment, and he's not going to poison the very family that he says he's been serving, then he needs to learn a very big lesson in humility and grace. Each of these brothers has defined themselves against the other, and we see that pattern play out. It plays out in our families, in our nation, in our world, and we see the devastating effects of that. Anytime we take a position that refuses dialogue and shuts our ears to our neighbors, we hear the drumbeat of this parable calling us back, saying, not me, we, not me, we, not me, we. Home, community, one's way of life is not something that either brother defines on his own. When they come back, either physically or emotionally, they learn something about themselves and this place that they've been calling home that neither could have had on their own. We might also recognize in this parable that God does meet us where we are, and that in allowing ourselves to be met, we are also changed. I spoke recently to a dignified, seemingly very upstanding older gentleman who is a leader in his church. And as we chatted away about his life and his history, he got really quiet and said that as a young man, he had made some really terrible choices, and those choices had hurt the people around him deeply. At one point, he fled his neighborhood for his own protection. He left everything behind him, a total mess. And in this new place that he'd gone, he joined a church. And the church invited him to be a leader of that congregation. And he was like, "You've got to be kidding me. Like, I am not a good guy. You don't want me in that role." The thing was, something about being in that role, being loved by the people of this church, had a way of changing him. He got married, he had kids, he got a good job, he donates his time helping people stay clean. And his life is complicated, it remains complicated, but this church knows his history and they know who he is. And while their love wasn't a get-out-of-jail-free card, he lives with a guilt every day, it does put everything in context. What any person has done is not the entirety of our stories. In God's world, no person is shut out, and everyone is welcome home. Now, for those who say that this parable is proof that we don't need an intermediary with God, we don't need a go-between to get God to love us, I have no brilliant theological responses to that. I don't know why God operates in the way that God does, only that in my life and in the things that I've experienced and witnessed, things happen that simply can't be explained by human effort. One example of that, a very close to home example, is Matthew 25. When we started the Matthew 25 initiative a few years ago, focusing on homelessness, a goal was to form deep and meaningful relationships with people who had experienced housing insecurity. And while parts of of this initiative went off swimmingly, and we were able to really help people who were in deep need with rent and utilities and transportation, in the area of deep and meaningful relationships, it was pretty much crickets for a really long time. I talked to people all the time, but I don't think we could say we really knew each other. But about a year ago, we reconnected with a guy named Rob. I knew him as Rob Dior. Most of the people who are in the homeless community in Westchester knew him as Bike Rob. Bike Rob is different than Wheelchair Rob, and there are a few other Robs. But Bike Rob was really sick with heart failure last year. He had a cardiac condition, and During this time where he was so sick, we managed to, we stored his oxygen machine in Greg's office. We got food, we got shelter, and we had a lot of long conversations. And at his request, we held his funeral at First Pres. And at that service, we sat around for hours afterwards just talking about him and talking about the difference that he made with his life, his honor, his gratitude, the way that he helped to support people and to shape them in really inhumane and rough circumstances. And after Rob's funeral, something changed around here. Now, we as a church did nothing differently. We were like, this is our program, same old, same old. But those people, the people that we had hoped to meet, they do come around now. We share lunch on Wednesdays. Many of them text in the morning to check in, ask how our days are. We know who is whose cousin and who is good at fixing bikes and who loves oranges but hates brownies. Now, I can't explain what happened, but I am pretty convinced that it has something to do with whatever God was using Rob for. When I think about Christ as an intermediary, I don't only or even mostly think about him being an intermediary between us and the Father. I really often think about him mediating between us and each other, all that would divide us, making this world not one of isolation, but a true home that stretches beyond blood and boundaries. Theologian Dorothy Solek calls grace borrowing the eyes of God. Now, it doesn't take our opinions away, it doesn't take our passions, our commitments, our beliefs, but it does put all that we hold in a different light. It becomes part of us, but it doesn't define us totally. And finally, I think there is really good news in this reminder that the images that we have of God, the language we use to describe God, is not the same as God. Jesus makes no attempt to have the Father in this parable match the ideal of an earthly or even a heavenly Father. The Father here is far from perfect. He's broken too. The family is far from perfect. And clearly, we all have far from perfect real families. There's that old slogan, like, love makes a family, and I think that's true. I mean, really, it's the only thing that can make a family. Love doesn't wait for perfection. It doesn't maintain impossibly high standards. I would say it barely maintains standards at all. It is because it's the only thing that can be. The mystery of love is not something that we understand and not something that we even have the ability to define, but it's only something that we can respond to, receive, and try to live out as we live our own messy, prodigal lives. And as God continues to cross the thresholds of all of our thresholds to welcome us home. So we pray this in the name of the one who makes us, the one who sustains us, and the one who holds us very, very close. Amen.
I invite you to stand as we sing. Through every battle, through every heartbreak, through every circumstance. So I believe that you are my fortress, you are my portion, you are my hiding place. So I believe you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe through every blessing, through every promise, through every breath I take. Oh, I believe that you are provider, and you are protector. You are the one I love. Oh, I believe you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe you are the way, the truth. set on you. And meet me here today, mercies that are new. All my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I'm here with you. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today with mercies that are new. All my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are. Oh, yeah. As we leave this place, let us go out with all of our brokenness, with all of our prodigalness, into the grace of God and giving the grace of God each day. Have a great week, and we'll see you back here next Sunday.